Do you ever feel drained when people drop by unannounced? Does the thought of hosting visitors fill you with a sense of unease, even when you care about these people? If you've ever wondered whether there's something wrong with you for not enjoying having guests in your personal space, Carl Jung has some fascinating insights that might completely change how you view this aspect of your personality. Carl Gustav Jung, the renowned Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, believed that our reactions to social situations reveal profound truths about our inner world. When it comes to not liking visitors, Jung would argue that this isn't a character flaw or antisocial behavior. It's actually a window into understanding your soul's deepest needs and psychological structure. Today, we're going to explore what Jung's analytical psychology reveals about people who prefer solitude over social visits, and why this preference might actually indicate a rich, complex inner life rather than social deficiency. We'll dive deep into Jung's concepts of introversion, the collective unconscious, and psychological types to understand why some souls are naturally protective of their personal sanctuary. But before we begin this psychological journey, if you're fascinated by the mysteries of the human psyche and want to explore more insights from Jung and other depth psychologists, make sure to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We regularly dive into the hidden aspects of personality and what they reveal about your authentic self. Jung believed that every aspect of our behavior serves a psychological function, and our relationship with visitors is no exception. When you feel resistant to having people in your space, your psyche might be protecting something precious: your inner world, your creative energy, or your process of individuation, which Jung considered the central goal of human psychological development. The resistance to visitors often stems from what Jung called the need for psychological containment. Your home isn't just a physical space. It's a reflection of your inner psychological landscape. When others enter this space, they're not just visiting your house. They're entering the external manifestation of your soul's sanctuary. For some personality types, this intrusion can feel overwhelming, not because they don't care about others, but because they instinctively understand the sacred nature of their personal environment. This understanding becomes even more crucial when we consider how modern society often pathologizes the need for solitude, especially in women, who are frequently expected to be naturally nurturing and welcoming to all. Jung's theory of psychological types provides crucial insight into why some people naturally resist having visitors. According to Jung, there are two fundamental attitudes toward life: extroversion and introversion. However, Jung's understanding of introversion goes far deeper than the popular misconception that introverts are simply shy or antisocial. For Jung, introversion represents a fundamental orientation toward the inner world of thoughts, feelings, and personal meaning-making. When an introverted person says they don't like having visitors, they're expressing a deep psychological truth about how they process energy and maintain psychological equilibrium. Their resistance isn't personal rejection, it's self-preservation at the soul level. Jung observed that introverted individuals need extended periods of solitude to process experiences, integrate emotions, and connect with what he called the transcendent function, the bridge between conscious and unconscious mind. Visitors, even beloved ones, interrupt this crucial psychological process. The introverted soul requires uninterrupted time and space to digest life experiences and transform them into personal wisdom. This becomes particularly relevant for women, who often face societal pressure to be constantly available and welcoming. Jung recognized that women, like men, have diverse psychological needs, and some women's souls are naturally oriented toward introspection rather than external social engagement. A woman who doesn't enjoy having visitors isn't failing at femininity. She's honoring her authentic psychological structure. Jung also introduced the concept of psychological boundaries, which are essential for mental health. People who don't like visitors often have highly sensitive psychological boundaries. They instinctively understand that their personal space serves as a protective barrier between their inner world and external demands. When others enter this space uninvited or too frequently, it can feel like a violation of these essential boundaries. The home environment, from a Jungian perspective, represents what he called the temenos, a sacred protected space where psychological transformation can occur. Ancient Greeks used this term to describe the sacred precinct surrounding a temple, and Jung adopted it to describe the psychological space needed for individuation. Your resistance to visitors might be your psyche's way of protecting this sacred space. Furthermore, Jung believed that some individuals are more susceptible to what he termed psychic contagion, the unconscious absorption of others' emotional and mental states. People who don't enjoy visitors might be highly sensitive to these invisible psychic influences. They intuitively recognize that having others in their personal space can disrupt their emotional equilibrium and mental clarity. This sensitivity isn't weakness. It's a sophisticated psychological defense mechanism that protects the integrity of the inner self. Jung's exploration of the collective unconscious reveals another fascinating dimension to why some souls resist visitors. According to Jung, we all carry within us the collective unconscious, a deeper layer of the psyche that contains universal patterns of human experience, which he called archetypes. Some individuals are more naturally attuned to these deeper psychological currents, and this sensitivity can make social interactions more complex and draining. When you don't like having visitors, you might be responding to archetypal energies that others bring into your space. Each person carries their own constellation of archetypal patterns: the mother, the warrior, the shadow, the anima or animus. For psychologically sensitive individuals, having visitors means unconsciously processing not just their conscious personality, but also these deeper archetypal influences they carry. This is particularly relevant for women who have developed what Jung called a strong animus, the masculine aspect of the female psyche. Women with a well-developed animus often prioritize intellectual pursuits, creative work, or spiritual development over social obligations. Their resistance to visitors isn't about disliking people. It's about protecting the psychological space needed for their inner masculine principle to flourish and create. Jung believed that the individuation process, the journey toward psychological wholeness and authentic selfhood, requires periods of solitude and introspection. People who don't enjoy visitors might be deeply engaged in this individuation process, whether consciously or unconsciously. Their psyche instinctively knows that constant social interaction can derail this crucial inner work. The shadow archetype also plays a role here. Jung taught that we all have shadow aspects, parts of our personality that we've rejected or hidden from others. People who resist having visitors might be protecting their right to be their complete selves, including their shadow aspects, within their personal space. The presence of others often activates our personas, the masks we wear in social situations, which can prevent authentic self-expression and shadow integration. Additionally, Jung recognized that some individuals serve as what we might call psychological containers for their families or communities. These people naturally absorb and process the emotional and psychological material of others. If you're someone who doesn't like visitors, you might be unconsciously protecting yourself from taking on more psychological material than you can healthily process. Jung's concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that reveal the interconnected nature of reality, suggests that your resistance to visitors might be synchronistically aligned with your soul's current needs. Perhaps your psyche is orchestrating periods of solitude because you're on the verge of important psychological insights or creative breakthroughs that require uninterrupted inner focus. The key insight from Jung is that psychological preferences aren't random quirks. They're expressions of your soul's deepest wisdom about what it needs for growth and integration. Jung's understanding of psychological energy provides another crucial lens for examining why some people don't enjoy having visitors. Unlike physical energy, which can be restored through rest and nutrition, psychological energy operates according to different principles. Jung observed that psychological energy flows in patterns that vary dramatically between individuals, and understanding your unique energy pattern is essential for psychological health. For many people who resist having visitors, their psychological energy naturally flows inward rather than outward. Jung called this introversion, but it's more nuanced than simple preference for solitude. Introverted psychological energy needs to move through internal processes, reflection, imagination, inner dialogue, and deep thinking, before it can be authentically expressed externally. Visitors interrupt this natural energy flow, creating psychological friction and depletion. Jung also recognized that some individuals have what we might call porous psychological boundaries. These people naturally absorb the emotional and mental states of others, often without realizing it. When such individuals have visitors, they're not just engaging socially. They're unconsciously processing and integrating the psychological material that others bring into their space. This can be exhausting and overwhelming, particularly for women who have been socialized to be emotionally available and responsive to others' needs. The concept of psychological space is central to Jung's understanding of mental health. Your home represents more than physical shelter. It's the external manifestation of your inner psychological landscape. For some people, having visitors in their personal space feels similar to having strangers rummage through their private thoughts and feelings. This isn't paranoia or antisocial behavior. It's a sophisticated understanding of the relationship between external environment and internal psychological state. Jung's work with active imagination, a technique for dialoguing with unconscious contents, reveals why solitude is essential for certain personality types. Active imagination requires quiet, uninterrupted time to allow unconscious materials to surface and be integrated into conscious awareness. People who don't like visitors might be naturally drawn to this type of inner work, recognizing intuitively that social interruptions can disrupt these delicate psychological processes. The anima and animus concepts also illuminate this preference. Jung believed that men carry an inner feminine principle, anima, and women carry an inner masculine principle, animus. For women with a strong animus, the need for solitude often relates to honoring their inner masculine energy, which requires focus, determination, and uninterrupted creative or intellectual work. Having visitors can scatter this focused energy and make it difficult to access their animus effectively. Furthermore, Jung understood that psychological development occurs in phases, and some phases naturally require more solitude than others. If you're going through a period of not wanting visitors, you might be in what Jung would call a necessary phase of psychological introversion, a time when your psyche needs to turn inward to integrate new experiences, heal old wounds, or prepare for the next stage of growth. Jung's exploration of the transcendent function reveals perhaps the most profound reason why some souls resist having visitors. The transcendent function is Jung's term for the psychological mechanism that creates a bridge between conscious and unconscious mind, allowing for the emergence of new insights, creative solutions, and psychological growth. This function requires what Jung called a creative pause, periods of mental stillness where the psyche can synthesize opposing forces and birth something entirely new. People who don't like having visitors might be unconsciously protecting their access to this transcendent function. Social interactions, even pleasant ones, engage the conscious mind in ways that can interrupt the delicate process of unconscious-conscious dialogue. Your resistance to visitors could be your psyche's way of preserving the mental space necessary for breakthrough insights, creative revelations, or important psychological realizations. This becomes particularly significant for women who are engaged in what Jung called the individuation process, the lifelong journey toward becoming your most authentic self. Traditional feminine roles often emphasize external relationships and caretaking, but individuation requires periods of inward focus and self-discovery. A woman who doesn't enjoy having visitors might be honoring her individuation needs over social expectations, choosing psychological authenticity over external approval. Jung also recognized that some individuals naturally function as what we might call psychological alchemists, people who transform raw emotional and mental material into wisdom and insight. This alchemical process requires solitude, contemplation, and uninterrupted inner work. Having visitors can scatter this focused inner attention and prevent the subtle psychological transformations that lead to personal growth and expanded consciousness. The concept of the wounded healer is relevant here as well. Jung observed that many psychologically sensitive individuals carry wounds that, when properly integrated, become sources of wisdom and healing capacity. People who resist visitors might be in the midst of transforming their own psychological wounds into healing wisdom. This process requires solitude, self-compassion, and the freedom to feel and process emotions without having to manage others' reactions or needs. If you're someone who finds value in understanding the deeper patterns of human psychology and want to explore more insights about personality, relationships, and personal growth, this is the perfect time to subscribe to our channel and join our community of depth psychology enthusiasts. We dive deep into the hidden aspects of personality that mainstream psychology often overlooks. Jung's understanding of psychological types also suggests that resistance to visitors might indicate a naturally contemplative temperament. Some souls are designed for deep thinking, philosophical reflection, and inner exploration rather than constant social engagement. This isn't a limitation. It's a specialized psychological function that serves important purposes in human development and cultural evolution. The hermit archetype, which Jung recognized as a universal pattern in the collective unconscious, represents the wisdom that comes from solitude and inner journey. The hermit archetype speaks to something profound in the human psyche, the recognition that some of life's most important discoveries happen in solitude. When you don't like having visitors, you might be channeling this ancient archetypal wisdom, understanding intuitively that your soul requires periods of withdrawal from the external world to access deeper truths and inner guidance. Jung's concept of psychological compensation also illuminates why some people resist visitors. The psyche naturally seeks balance, and if your external life involves significant social demands, whether through work, family obligations, or community involvement, your unconscious mind might compensate by creating strong resistance to additional social interactions in your personal space. This resistance isn't antisocial behavior. It's your psyche's intelligent attempt to maintain psychological equilibrium. For women specifically, Jung recognized that the journey towards psychological wholeness often requires challenging social expectations about feminine behavior. A woman who doesn't enjoy having visitors might be unconsciously rebelling against cultural programming that expects women to be constantly available, nurturing, and welcoming. Her resistance could represent a healthy assertion of psychological boundaries and an honoring of her authentic needs over external expectations. The shadow integration process, which Jung considered essential for psychological health, also requires solitude and privacy. Your shadow contains not only negative aspects you've rejected, but also positive qualities that you've been afraid to express. Having visitors often activates your persona, the socially acceptable mask you wear in public, which can prevent authentic shadow work and self-acceptance. Jung's understanding of psychological seasons suggests that resistance to visitors might indicate you're in a necessary period of psychological winter, a time for inner reflection, rest, and preparation for future growth. Just as nature requires periods of dormancy for renewal, the human psyche needs cycles of introversion and solitude for psychological regeneration. The concept of psychological sovereignty is central to Jung's vision of mental health. People who don't like having visitors might be exercising their right to psychological sovereignty, the authority to determine who and what influences enter their personal psychological space. This isn't selfishness. It's self-respect and recognition of the sacred nature of one's inner world. Jung also observed that highly sensitive individuals often serve as unconscious processors of collective psychological material. If you resist having visitors, you might be protecting yourself from absorbing more collective emotional and mental content than you can healthily integrate. Your resistance could be a wise boundary that prevents psychological overwhelm and maintains your ability to function as a clear, conscious individual rather than a repository for others' unprocessed psychological material. The individuation process that Jung championed requires not just self-knowledge, but also the courage to live according to your authentic nature rather than social expectations. Your dislike of visitors might represent your soul's commitment to this authentic way of being, choosing psychological integrity over social conformity. As we reach the end of our exploration into Jung's perspective on not liking visitors, it's important to understand that this preference reveals something beautiful and sophisticated about your psychological makeup. Rather than being a character flaw or social deficiency, your resistance to having visitors in your personal space demonstrates a deep understanding of your soul's needs and a commitment to honoring your authentic psychological structure. Jung believed that every aspect of our personality serves a purpose in our overall psychological development. Your need for solitude and protected personal space isn't something to overcome or fix. It's something to understand, honor, and integrate into a life that supports your highest psychological functioning. The goal isn't to force yourself to enjoy having visitors, but to create a life structure that respects your natural psychological rhythms and energy patterns. For women especially, this understanding can be liberating. Society often expects women to be endlessly available, welcoming, and nurturing, but Jung's psychology reminds us that authentic femininity includes the right to psychological boundaries, solitude, and self-protection. A woman who honors her need for visitor-free space is modeling healthy psychological sovereignty and authentic self-care. The practical implications of Jung's insights are profound. Instead of feeling guilty about not wanting visitors, you can reframe this preference as psychological wisdom. Your resistance might be guiding you toward important inner work, creative projects, or healing processes that require uninterrupted solitude. Trust your instincts about when and how much social interaction serves your highest good. Jung also reminds us that psychological preferences can change over time. Your current resistance to visitors might be temporary, serving a specific phase of your psychological development. Alternatively, it might be a permanent aspect of your personality that requires lifelong honoring and accommodation. Either way, it deserves respect rather than judgment. The key takeaway from Jung's perspective is that your soul knows what it needs for growth, healing, and authentic expression. When you don't like having visitors, you're not being antisocial. You're being psychologically intelligent. You're protecting the sacred space where your deepest self can emerge, heal, and flourish. Remember that Jung's greatest contribution to psychology was his insistence that symptoms and preferences often contain wisdom rather than pathology. Your resistance to visitors might be one of your soul's greatest gifts to you, a protective mechanism that ensures you have the psychological space necessary for becoming who you're truly meant to be. In a world that often values extroversion and constant social engagement, choosing to honor your need for solitude is an act of courage and self-respect. Trust your psychological instincts, create the life structure that supports your authentic nature, and remember that your soul's wisdom is always guiding you toward your highest good.